So the next one we'll focus on is Iwagumi. Again, this is a George Farmer tank that I pulled, I think he just set up not too long ago, pulled off of his Flickr stream. You can see the contrast already just looking at it. I do want to say before I get started that Iwagumi in a lot of ways is a subset of the nature aquarium style, but we'll go through here first. So, just like the Dutch is from the European gardens, Iwagumi draws heavily from Japanese gardens. And actually the word Iwagumi literally means there's rock formation. In comparison to the Dutch, where everything is the plants, here everything is the hardscape. The way that you place the rocks, the way that they're leaning, is very minimalistic. You don't have many species of plants. In those Dutch tanks, you know, we're well over a dozen species of plants. Iwagumi, you're probably looking sometimes one, probably no more than 3 or 4 in most cases. The species of plants that you do use are almost always the foreground plants, small leaf varieties, nothing that's going to take away from the rocks. And then basically the thinking is that once the rocks are placed correctly, then all the plants are just there to complement it, soften some of the edges, fill in some of the gaps. And the rocks definitely follow kind of the golden rule in terms of proportions. So we mentioned the plants, mostly foreground, your glosso, your HC, a couple of different species of hairgrass, that's the Eleacaris, number of species of mosses, Riccia fluitans, those types of things are often seen in the Iwagumis. So, the most common form of Iwagumi, and just before I get started, I am not an expert in, I think you can probably go to school, gardening school in Japan, I would think, to focus on, to learn all of the background and principles and of Iwagumi. But kind of I guess the traditional one that you see, or the one you see most often in our hobby, is the Sanzan Iwagumi, which literally means 3 pillars. So your basic formations are made up of 3 rocks. One large one, which all of this actually stems, has symbolism for them in Buddhism, where the largest rock is like the Buddha, and then you have the smaller attendant stones that are bowing down to it, that are, I guess, pointing towards that large rock. They actually have names for each and every single one of these stones. I'm not going to pretend that I know all of them. Bob. But I went ahead and took the liberty of totally plagiarizing from, I guess it's not plagiarizing if I tell you where it's from, but Amano's Aqua Journal site. So, because he had a really neat or good drawing, kind of few steps. So, this main stone he called the Ayashi. Anyone who knows Japan probably knows, or Japanese knows that I'm probably butchering these. But the first step when you're starting in Iwagumi, get that big rock where it needs to be. Follow your ratio, roughly a third of the way over from the tank, and get it where it needs to be. I think that I was reading that they were saying that generally in the Japanese gardens it would be upright to the sky, but that Amano is kind of, he usually has his leaning to go with the flow, water of the flow, to show that it's kind of standing strong against that resistance. Then it's a matter, once you have the large rock, the remaining rocks are placed in descending order of size, so your next largest followed by the next largest after that. They have their own names as well. And then just making sure that they're complementing. As we mentioned before, you often have one that might be almost bowing towards the larger rock. And there are, even in the Sanzan Iwagumi, you have then, you know, rocks after that that you can place in there. Now, as far as aquascaping goes, once you kind of place them, then you start with your bottom layer of aqua soil, or whatever your substrate is, and once you have the rocks, rather than to make them so they don't look as just placed there, you fill in more substrate around them so they kind of fit into a slope of some sort. And of course, Amano would say then use smaller grain, powder type aqua soil. So here's one of Amano's tanks, which is basically illustrating these principles. He places rocks, and then the planting around them is doing nothing but all the short plants, some Riccia and I think HC, maybe Glosso. And then it gets a little bit taller right around the rock to kind of draw your eye towards that guy. But again, very minimalistic. The fish are small. You can probably barely even notice them the first time you just glance at the tank. Of course, they do a really great job with the background effects with the blue. It looks like it could be a hillside scene or something. But it's not just the Japanese folks that do them. We have our own Jeff Sensky from Houston. I think he placed with this tank in 2007. Very nice Iwagumi. Even though this is more than just 3, 4, 5 rocks, the principles are kind of the same. He has this large rock with their smaller, medium-sized rocks to support it, and then you have a complementary kind of, here's another smaller than this rock, but then the complementing rocks around it. So in a sense, you can break it down into, groupings.
Well, and he has a golden rule within the golden rule, because he's again divided from the large rock to the large side into again thirds, with the smaller rock repeating the pattern on the other side.
Exactly, and the rocks are all of the same type, so they match. You wouldn't want to have quartz here and volcanic rock here, or anything like that. If you do have substrate or sand showing in your foreground, you would want the rocks to match so that you could literally think that, hey, this rock is breaking down into this sand. This is a much larger tank, so he was able to use, I think it's Blixa japonica, as the kind of grassy softener of the base of the rocks. But again, smaller fish in proportion. Another one of Amano's. There are, as I mentioned, lots of different styles of Iwagumi itself, not just the ones that we've talked about so far. I'm not sure what all of them are, but this is clearly still very cool. But it's not just, there's no really, I guess that's probably your major rock, but the rest are different, but still very much in proportion, in harmony. And then here's another one similar. And then basically, this is a quote from Amano that's saying that when you're doing Iwagumi, yeah, it's necessary to actually practice arranging rocks many times to develop a sense of where they should go. But ultimately, it's not your eyes, but your heart that because there are so many aspects of Iwagumi to consider, such as rhythm, standing, stability, powerfulness, tranquility, wabi-sabi, and so on. So, just it's very much, I guess, can transcend just you're doing escape in your tank. And at least that's where it originates from. Any questions on Iwagumi?
Kris, could you go back to one more, that one? One of the things that Gazenfar pointed out last year when we were doing the workshop was, in a layout like this, if you imagine the axis of the rocks, you see how all three of them are tilted at different angles, but if you were to draw a line down the axis, they would all meet at a point about at the bottom front of the aquarium, and that helps to give you a sense that they're actually all part of the same larger rock, which kind of enhances the idea that it's a shoreline or it's a mountain range or something along those lines. So keep that in mind when you're laying out the angles, that if you can get that kind of symmetry, that can really have a pretty powerful effect.
Definitely, and so like these, they're pretty much all pointing, so the center is right about here where they're all meeting, just like that. And there are in this one some even smaller supporting stones too, which fall in line. Great comment. Anyone else? All right.